Charles thinks it's Lent, it's Advent, Charles.
Well, it's all celebrated.
You got a purple sport.
Oh, well, you know, look at all the red. I didn't want to blend in.
Well, we're glad everybody's here today and in a good mood. I hope your Christmas stuff is going well. We still put up a tree and decorate everything for the grandchildren. You spend hours on end doing all that stuff for about a 3-hour event. Is that about where most of y'all are? So, but it looks nice when it's done. We appreciate having visitors today. We're always delighted that we have visitors with us and that you can be with your families usually. We appreciate all the work for the Christmas party that we had, and that was very, 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 very nice, and I think everybody that came had a good time. And so we appreciate all of that. Happy birthday to those of you that are having birthdays. Happy anniversary to those that y'all are having anniversary. Paige, what he was trying to say is it may have been 41 years, but it still just seems like the first year.
Accepted.
Now, how to dig you, Jim, out of your hole, I'm not sure. You've been there before, so I'm sure you'll be fine. I had people asking me after the party a question, and I kind of puzzled over it for a couple of days. They said, how long have you been doing this? And I said, well, I kind of lost track. I know it's more than 15 years and less than 20, but it's been a long time. And I appreciate your all's not getting at least so tired of me running my mouth that you're saying much about it, but I appreciate that. But then I thought, why would you keep doing something like this? Well, you know, I enjoy the company. And so, you know, there's a lot of pleasant people in here that have, but we've become a part of each other's lives. But then it finally occurred to me, a lot of places where I go and talk today, I can't use readily available references that mean a lot to me. Because you're talking about people that were not born until the 1980s. They don't even know who John Kennedy was, or whatever the case may be. I decided I could come here and talk, and I can talk about stuff from the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, and you all still get it. So see, that probably makes a difference. So at any rate, Dennis, we congratulate you on your retirement. We know that doesn't mean you'll stop working, but you may just change the place. You've done a wonderful job with this Goodwill. For those of us that have lived here for a really long time, it's never been bad. It's always been important. It's never been as good as what you brought it to. So we really appreciate that. We're in the third Sunday of Advent by my count, and we have been kind of looking at a creche and trying to see if we can say some things about the characters and the iconic kind of images that are there in that creche. I'm going to start off today by mentioning something that I made a Sunday school lesson out of a couple of months ago. If you're still looking for a gift to give somebody, you might think about if they still read giving them Melinda Gates, The Moment of Lift. I talked about that in the Sunday school lesson. That is really a wonderful story about what Melinda Gates and her husband Bill have done philanthropically to help people across this world. And I really, really enjoyed the metaphor that she used about this moment of lift. And those of us that fly, and all of us have flown, but you're kind of going out down that runway, and then that moment of lift occurs and the plane begins to lift off. Sometimes you feel a little relieved about that, but most of the time nowadays, with all the problems with flying, you feel like we're finally underway. We're actually getting somewhere. And so I loved her concept of how sometimes with the money that they've given to people across this world, that they've been able to find times in which these people come to a moment of lift where their lives really start moving in a different direction, or they really start doing something that is working. It's wonderful to feel that feeling when things really seem to be moving in a good direction. But I'm going to change that just a little bit, and I'll explain why in a minute, but I want you to kind of extend that metaphor and add to your thoughts not the moment of lift, but the moment of traction. The moment of traction. And so let's think about that just for a moment and see how that might lead us into Advent and the Christmas story. About halfway between Athens and Etowah, when I was growing up, there was a quarter-mile dirt track. And not having all that much to do in terms of entertainment in those pre-television days, you went out on Saturday night and Friday night to the racetrack, and that was always fascinating. They always had wrecks. Nobody got hurt very badly. There was a lot of noise and smoke from cars, and so it was just the kind of thing that would appeal to the teenager. When I got between my junior and senior year, they were always looking for things that would bring in additional people, and so they took 6 football players that were from different high school teams in the area. They painted cars up in the colors of the teams. They put our jersey numbers on the side of the car, and we came in and had a pre-race, and that was supposed to bring in new clients and all that kind of stuff. And probably it did. They instructed us to have someone take the masks off of our football helmets, that we would have to have a helmet on to race in the race, not that anything else couldn't get damaged. And so I thought that was the grandest thing in the world, to be in a second-hand car with a big motor on it going around that quarter-mile dirt track. That's the kind of pre-show. My father never gave me much advice, but he knew a lot about cars and motors, and so when I went out there that night in all of my glory, he said, "Now you be careful, because whenever that race starts, you're going to have the tendency just to throw that accelerator down just as hard as you can. If you're not careful, you're just going to stop right in the middle of the track. You will flood your engine." Some of you know what that means. You throw too much gasoline into the carburetor and the thing would just drown itself out. And so I went in there determined I was not going to stop in the middle of the track. And so we got this car started. They were shaking with power. We went around the track to get the engines warmed up 3 or 4 times. And then this poor old boy that I knew when I was growing up, who got to wave the starting and finish flag, started waving the green flag. I'd gotten so pumped up with adrenaline that you know where this is going. So I slammed my foot down on that accelerator, and some of you remember what a car sounded like when the engine would flood. And so it just kind of went boom, 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 and stopped. And there I was, an obstacle for the other cars, sitting dead still in the middle of the track. I never in that event gained any traction. I'm sure I might have won, or I'm sure I would have put in a good show. I'm sure that would have been a lasting memory. Well, in some respects it is. Sitting there like a fool in the middle of the track because I didn't do what my daddy said and I flooded the engine. I gained no traction. Well, that same year, they were building Highway 11 bypass from Riceville to Nyota. That was before the interstates. Some of you have been on that stretch of road. It was really, really helpful because you didn't have to stay on old Highway 11 and go through Athens and all those towns. And so they had Highway 11 bypass. Now, you may not have thought about this, but when that road was completed, it was the straightest stretch of road in the state of Tennessee. And boy, I mean, you can get on it at Riceville and you just go right straight all the way to Nyota. There's not a curve in that road to speak of. It took them forever to build it, and so there were often stretches of 1 mile or 2 of road that was just kind of sitting out there in what then were a bunch of big fields. Well, you know what we'd do. We'd go up there and drag race because we had seen that on television and the movies, and that seemed so big of a thing to do. I remember one time having a baseball coach who ended up being a wonderful writer for the Chattanooga Times and a very, very close personal friend of Ruth Dixon and me. who was arrested one night with our city manager. They'd had a little bit too much to drink at the local American Legion outpost, and they got up there racing lawnmowers. He didn't get to be the coach of our baseball team any longer, and we regretted that. We took great pride in what our coach had kind of tried to do. Our problem was that we'd go up there and race those cars, but they'd just take off down the straight stretch of road. It wasn't like anything we saw on television. There was no spinning of tires. There was no smoke going up everywhere. And so we just kind of went down the road. So then some of our friends, and this is thinking in McMinn County, Bill, you relate to this. Some of our friends figured out if you could get burnt oil, or if you could get water, burnt oil is better, or if you could slip out some of your mother's cooking oil, and you could put that on the road, ease your car up over it, boy, those things would slip and slide and make all kind of smoke. And so you would sit there in that car, those engines, the engine thrown into gear. Y'all remember when engines had gears? And those back wheels would spin and the smoke would come, and then you'd feel it. Then you'd feel it. You'd achieve traction. And in that moment of traction, you were just thrown out down that road. It's great to have been young sometimes and have those kind of memories. I hadn't thought about that in years and years. But a few weeks ago, I was in a conference in Texas, and we were having a conversation about how events that take place in our personal lives can have great impact on the performance of our work. We all know that. One man began to talk, and he began to affirm what we were talking about in the conversation. And he began to talk about how several years before in his life that he and his wife had gone through a terrible divorce. That had impacted his work and caused him also not only to lose his wife, but to also lose his job. And so he was reflecting upon what we were talking about in the conversation. And then another guy spoke up. I thought it was kind of getting a little bit awkward, but it seemed like they could talk about it well. And the other guy said, he said, I knew you when that happened. And he said, I've thought about that now all these years. And he said, I never have been able to figure out what happened to you all. What happened that brought about this divorce? And the guy reflected for a moment and he said, I'm not always sure either. I didn't do anything bad, and she didn't do anything bad. It just seemed that we never found traction. We never found traction. I wonder if you can reflect on a marriage or a relationship that didn't work. Maybe you didn't find traction. Or maybe you could reflect on a relationship that really has worked, and you may be able to identify a moment of traction that occurred in your relationship. That might be an interesting thing for you to think about today. The relationship that you've had with somebody and the moment that relationship found traction. Sometimes that can occur in negative moments or what appear to be. I remember Phyllis and I had been married for several weeks, and I had brought from my background and from my family history and from my life a stack of probably 20 or 30 board games. And I'm not sure what was going on that particular day, or if there wasn't anything on TV or whatever the case may be, but I went back into the place where I'd stored those things and pulled out 2 or 3, and I said, came walking into the room with them, and I said, let's play a board game. That sounds like a nice way to gain traction in your relationship, perhaps, and so I'll never forget as long as I live, and that's been a long time ago. She looked up at me and she said, I don't play board games. That had never come up. We did not have premarital counseling. I thought everybody did that. But it's like we discovered other things in our lives to do that would give traction besides board games. Sometimes it can be something that's kind of negative, but then it turns into a positive. I can remember, and I bet some of you all have this same kind of memory. I can remember being in a Kroger store in New Albany, Indiana, in our first year out of college when I had started seminary. And so help me, we were standing there with me emptying my pockets, and we were counting pennies. I'll tell you why we were counting pennies. We were trying to figure out if we had enough pennies to buy a cheap pack of hot dogs to go in the sauerkraut that we just bought. We didn't. I understand now that if you eat 4 ounces of sauerkraut every day of your life, that it will solve every problem of your gastronomical digestive system. I hate sauerkraut. I've got a kind of a negative memory associated with that. But I remember her saying to me feeling embarrassed in that moment. She just doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Traction. A negative event sometimes can create traction. And so I think that we can find traction in relationship with other people. And when we feel that occurring, it can be a beautiful and wonderful reality. What if we change that a little? What if we talked about finding traction in our faith? Or what if we ask ourselves honestly in our relationships with God if we feel like that we've had that moment of traction where there was really something authentically significant that was taking place that gave us a sense of assurance that there was actually something going in our faith? Or sometimes is our faith more like a high school kid sitting in the middle of a quarter-mile dirt track and they've flooded their engine and they're not going anywhere? Or sometimes is our faith sitting there spinning wheels in one way or another, not really finding any forward direction? How do we know, or how do we achieve traction as it relates to our faith? Well, I thought about that. I got to thinking about these shepherds that decorate our creches and that are on the front of our Christmas cards, or that we see kids dressed up as in our Christmas pageants. What could these shepherds that made their way to that Bethlehem manger, what can they tell us about achieving traction in our faith? I think they can tell us a lot. Now the rest of this lesson gets real simple, so it's something maybe we can all remember. I'm going to try to. Number one, I believe these shepherds teach us that sometimes in order to get traction, we have to get out of our comfort zones. We have to get out of our comfort zones. By getting out of our comfort zones, I mean that sometimes we have to do things that we don't really have to do. And so I don't think any of those shepherds had to go to Bethlehem. I don't think any of those shepherds had to do anything except what the kind of habit trails of their lives had dictated. Make sure all the sheep were in, get themselves good and warm in their wool, whatever they had from the sheep, and kind of just go to bed. But they didn't. They got out of their comfort zones and they went to Bethlehem. Sometimes getting out of your comfort zones means doing something that the crowd around you is going to think is a little unconventional or illogical, or that doesn't exactly fit with the expectations of the crowd that is around you. And so I'll bet you anything that there was somebody on that Galilean hillside, as they saw their friends gathering together and getting their plans in place and heading for Bethlehem, who had to remark, "You guys are crazy. You're going out here in the dark on a cold night when you could be sitting by the fire, or you could be kind of being sleeping and comfortable for tomorrow's work. You mean you're going out down to Bethlehem of all things? I'll bet someone said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in all of my life. Only an idiot would get up in the middle of the night and go to Bethlehem. What are you guys smoking out here in the backside of Galilee? I think you're crazy. And sometimes it doesn't take much more than feeling like that we're going to be embarrassed in somebody else's eyes to keep us solidly in the middle of our comfort zones, and we don't get traction. I think that sometimes we get caught up so much in what is logical to the crowds that we're a part of that we stay stuck in our comfort zones. You see, in order for those shepherds to experience what they experienced at that birth of Jesus, they had to have a willingness to step beyond convention. They had to have a willingness to step beyond logical. They had to have a willingness to step beyond the conclusions and expectations of their kind of peer group. And they had to kind of step out of their comfort zones a little bit. I had two friends that were afraid to get in the car on that drag strip, or who thought that going to that racetrack was kind of beneath their station in life, like you would have a station in life in Athens, Tennessee. But shoot, man, I made my life out of getting out of comfort zones. And that may give you kinship with those shepherds. And maybe that's when you can get traction. Second thing, I think those shepherds had to have some capacity for slow and steady, as opposed for just living their lives in terms of instant gratification. Had it been instant gratification, there are plenty of sheep around, they've had a really nice meal, I'm sure. But in order to go to Bethlehem, think about what all they probably had to do. They had to make some accommodation for the safety of the sheep. They had to make some accommodation for their families that probably weren't all traveling with them. They had to get some provisions together for making their trip. They weren't in an Uber and they weren't on a train. They were going to have to figure out how to walk down there. And so they had to have some capacity in their lives for something kind of maturing and happening slow and steady over their lives. I'm not sure we're very good at slow and steady anymore. And I'm not sure sometimes if our world gives us the opportunity for slow and steady. Now, Dennis is getting ready to retire, and I admire that, because now Dennis might have the opportunity for a little slow and steady about something. I can't get there, Dennis, and so I don't have much slow and steady. I keep thinking about that, though. At least I'm that far. But I'm not sure we have much slow and steady in our lives. I had an interesting conversation with someone a few weeks ago. They were talking to me about prayer. And you and I both know who this person is. And we would identify this person as a person of faith, or someone whose faith has been a part of their lives. And this person came to me and said, you know, my prayer life isn't very good. And I'm disturbed by that. And then this person said, you know, I'm not sure it's ever been all that good. And I'm disturbed by that. I've just about quit. And he said, what can I do? And I said, well, to be honest with you, there have been times in my life in which I've not been very pleased with my prayer life, and it's not been really good. Sometimes, you know how the old expression goes, I felt like those prayers didn't get much more than above the ceiling. And so he said, well, what have you done? And I said this, and this doesn't make you a saint, but I said, never stop. Make sure it's there every day. Even if it feels like that I'm having to. It's there every day. Even if it feels like I'm asking or talking or saying the same thing over and over every day. I don't stop. And what I find out is that by doing that as a discipline of your life every day, even at those moments in which it's not feeling all that meaningful and successful. That there come times, and there even come stretches of times, in which there is a sense of the presence of God, or there's a sense of realness or authenticity about it. And even though you may feel like at times you're going through emotions, that allows you to have those times in which you know the word that's coming, in which you really feel a sense of traction. You just got to do it. You got to just do it every day. You got to be slow and steady about it, and you'll have those times in which it really hits and the traction's there, and it's really meaningful. Those shepherds had to have the capacity in their lives for some slow and steady. There's not a lot of instant gratification in the life of a shepherd. If that's their goal, they probably are struggling every day. Now listen to this one. Those angels came to those shepherds, and those angels said to those shepherds, I have good news for you. In order for that moment to work, in order for some attraction to occur, those shepherds would have had to have had a capacity for hearing the good news that was there. And I don't believe that's an automatic. I even think that we've created a world that is so filled with bad news, or bad angles on news, or bad things that are happening, that we could lose our capacity or lose our sense for good news. That'd be awful. Because the whole concept of euangelion, good news, is what the New Testament and the message of Jesus is about. So what happens if we begin to become less and less sensitive to good news because we're so overwhelmed by bad news? I've got to where on these evening local television shows, and I've just about quit watching. Now, we kind of copy our TV shows or tape them, but that way you don't have to watch commercials. You can zip through them. So I just zipped to Paul Barris, because Paul says the weather's going to be a particular way, then you can just about bet the weather's going to be a particular way. But are you like that? Aren't you tired of local television news that 80% of the news part has to do with the police report? Who's got shot, who's got stabbed, what's got robbed, who they're looking for that they can't find. I mean, it's just a constant barrage of bad news that makes you almost fearful of getting out of the house. Now what I'm saying, surround yourself with enough bad news and you won't get out of the house. You'll stay on the hill with sheep. Surround yourself with enough bad news and you'll lose your capacity to hear and look for and listen to the good news that's there. And so I think these shepherds had a capacity for hearing good news. And then finally, I believe these shepherds understood that sometimes you just gotta be there. One of my greatest memories of life occurred in Scottsdale, Arizona, when the University of Tennessee beat Florida State for the national championship in the first BCS football championship. I can tell you where we were sitting. I can tell you where my wife was and where my two kids were. I can tell you what we did in that couple of days. And I can tell you what it felt like, traction. Whenever you knew that you were actually going to win that football game. Now, across all these years, I've heard all kinds of people talk about that. And then I say, I was there. Or I've seen all kinds of playbacks or highlight reels that show that, but I was there. And I think these shepherds understood something's going on here. Something's happening here. And I can sit back up here on this hill and wonder about it. Or I can let my buddies go and I can let them come back and tell me about it. But maybe this is one time in which I need to put myself in the middle of something and be there. And so the Bible says that at least some of those shepherds said, let us go and see. And I'm not sure we can find the kind of traction of faith without going and looking and seeing. And in our lives, that doesn't necessarily mean a trip to the Holy Land, although that's wonderful. That doesn't mean a trip through Europe to look at some of the old cathedrals and worship in them, although that's wonderful. Sometimes going and seeing means to take the resources of our lives and take the resources of our energy and get in the middle of serving somebody or get in the middle of helping somebody and seeing for yourself what love and care and action is all about and how it feels. Some of you have done that, and what you've experienced in doing it is traction. All right, let's review. Let's let the school teacher in me come in. You want to get greater traction in your faith? One, be willing to get out of your comfort zone. You want to get greater traction in your faith? Understand that sometimes faith is an experience of slow and steady with moments that are of great meaning in the midst, sometimes honestly, of some that aren't so meaningful. Number three, if you want to gain traction in your life, start looking around for good news. Start celebrating it a little bit and start building a greater capacity for the good things that are out there in life instead of all the bad stuff that we hear about until we're blue in the face. And number four, if you want to have traction in your faith, sometimes you've got to go and get involved in the middle of it for yourself. And then the ancient text reads, the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all that they had seen and heard. They returned, glorifying and praising God. They had found traction. Let us pray. Help us, our Father, that we might explore ways that we can live our lives that will help us feel a greater sense of your nearness and presence in our lives. Help us, our Father, that we might, in our most important relationships, find greater traction. And help us that we might find in our relationship with you greater traction. So that there is something that has the feeling of sticking. So that there is something that has the feeling of having ground that we can move from. Help us that we might enter life in service. Help us that we might look and celebrate moments of good news. Help us that even in something like our prayer life that we can end up knowing that slow and steady can win the game. And oh God, help us that we might step out of the habit trail of our everyday and look at the new ways that you come to us every day of our lives, especially at this Christmas. We ask in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you all very much. You have a good week. Charles?
Jim was going to tell us something real quick.
Thank you, Charles. Hey, Steve mentioned Moments of Lift, and that was a 4 months ago recording. It's a 30-minute deal. It was done on the 14th of July. This is sort of part two. I just was flooded with memories of Moments of Lift. If you want to get to Moments of Lift and see part one of this, it will be great. And I'll tell you how to get there. That's what I wanted to do here. If you go to youtube.com and type in the search engine at YouTube, it'll say, all you have to put in there is Moments of Lift, Steve Byrum. And Steve has told me Byrum is spelled like the bootleggers, Byrum. So what I was going to tell you is it's easy to find that way because I have now successfully indexed all this and they're in the Google search priorities. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you very much.
Okay. One other quick thing, does anybody have an address or know how to get in touch with Steve Kinsey? Okay, Jane Isbell? Okay.
It may be on the bulletin board.
Okay, we'll check that. Okay, go and have a great week. See you next Sunday.